The desert sun cast its golden light over the timeless pyramids, their colossal forms cutting into the blue sky like sentinels of eternity. For centuries, they had stood, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. But beneath their limestone facades lay secrets even the sands dared not whisper. Dr. Lena Farrow wiped the sweat from her brow as she descended the narrow shaft leading deep into the Great Pyramid of Giza. Her team had spent years decoding hieroglyphic anomalies found scattered across the plateau, symbols that seemed to defy conventional translation. They spoke not of gods or kings but of something the ancients called Nihei Kai, the eternal now. "This is it," she whispered, her voice echoing faintly. The chamber opened into a vast circular room, its walls inlaid with obsidian and crystalline formations that pulsed with a faint, unearthly glow. At the center stood a raised dais, upon which rested a massive, multifaceted crystal. It shimmered with colors that seemed to shift depending on the angle of her gaze, hues not found on any earthly spectrum. Lena reached for her comm team A. "I found something. It's alive." Her assistant's voice crackled back, laden with static. "Alive? What do you mean?" "I don't know how else to describe it. The crystal, it's resonating. Like it's singing." As she approached, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each step. Lena's fingers grazed the crystal, and the world shattered. She blinked. The chamber was gone. Instead, she stood in the same spot, but the pyramid was pristine, its surface gleaming white with polished Tura limestone. Around her, men and women in elaborate linen robes moved purposefully, their hands glowing faintly as they manipulated smaller crystals. Chants filled the air, their voices harmonizing with the crystal's hum. "Lena!" A voice called, startling her. She spun around to face a man who looked strikingly familiar. His features mirrored her colleague Rovi, but his eyes glowed faintly blue, and his expression carried a wisdom that seemed otherworldly. "You shouldn't be here yet," he said, his tone both gentle and firm. "Yet?" Lena stammered. "Who are you? Where am I?" "You're in the heart of the Perduit, the house of eternity. But this moment belongs to us, not to you." Lena struggled to process his words. "I don't understand. This pyramid, it's a machine? And these crystals?" "Time crystals," he corrected. "They anchor moments in the flow of Nihei, allowing us to observe, influence, and protect the integrity of existence." "But why? To what end?" He studied her for a moment before answering. "Humanity's timeline is fragile. From the moment we ascended, we knew our survival depended on mastering time. The pyramids are not tombs, they are conduits. They ensure the balance of what was, what is, and what will be." Lena stepped back, overwhelmed. "You're telling me, you built these to control time itself?" "Not control," he said. "Guide. And now that you've touched the crystal, you've become part of the weave. You are both observer and participant." Before she could respond, the world fractured again. She found herself back in the chamber, the hum of the crystal now deafening. But something was different. The walls were no longer smooth but etched with shifting hieroglyphs, like the stone itself was alive. Rovi's voice blared through her comm. "Lena, are you all right? We've lost all sensor readings on your position." I think I just traveled through time," she said breathlessly. "You're joking." "I wish I were," she replied. As Lena stepped back from the crystal, it flared brightly, and she felt a pull deep within her chest, a tether she couldn't sever. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to arrange themselves into a single, coherent message. The cycle begins anew. Protect the flow. Prevent the divergence. Lena's heart raced. She realized the crystal wasn't just a tool. It was a warning system. And now, it had chosen her. Lena stared at the message, her pulse pounding in her ears. The crystal's hum settled into a rhythmic thrum, like a heartbeat syncing with her own. She felt the weight of something vast and incomprehensible pressing down on her, a responsibility she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. Rovi's voice crackled back through the comm. "Lena, you're not making any sense. What divergence? Are you saying this is some kind of time travel device?" Lena shook her head, even though Rovi couldn't see her. Not a device. It's alive, somehow. It's connected to time itself. And it's warning us. Before she could explain further, the crystal pulsed again, and Lena felt herself being yanked through another rupture in reality. She landed hard, sand cascading around her as she fell to her knees. The air was filled with the acrid stench of burning wood and flesh. Distant screams echoed through the landscape. She looked up to see a massive army advancing, wielding weapons of gleaming metal far beyond anything she'd ever seen in history books. This isn't ancient Egypt, Lena muttered to herself. The sky was a sickly orange, and the pyramids in the distance looked warped, their once perfect symmetry distorted into jagged, alien shapes. A figure appeared beside her, seemingly out of nowhere. It was Ravi, or at least someone who looked like him, clad in futuristic armor that glimmered faintly with the same crystalline hue as the pyramid's heart. "You're in the divergence," he said grimly. Lena staggered to her feet. What happened? What is this? "This is what the crystal warned us about," he said, his voice tight. "Someone or something tampered with the flow of time. They exploited the pyramid's power for their own ends. And this is the result." Lena turned back to the approaching army. Their weapons emitted bursts of light that disintegrated everything in their path. Entire villages vanished in seconds. "Who are they?" Lena asked, dread curling in her stomach. "Not who," Ravi corrected. "What?" "They call themselves the Nihil. They're not from Earth, or this timeline. They found a way to hijack the time crystals, and now they're unmaking the fabric of reality to reshape it in their image." Lena's mind raced. How do we stop them? Ravi handed her a small, glowing shard. It hummed in her hand, resonating with the larger crystal she had touched earlier. "This is a fragment of the central crystal. It links you to the flow of time. You need to return to the moment before the divergence and stop it from happening." Lena hesitated. "How?" "I don't even know what caused it." "You'll know when you see it," Ravi said. His eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked less like a soldier and more like a colleague. "You're the only one who can do this, Lena. The crystal chose you for a reason." Before she could argue, another pulse from the shard enveloped her. She was back in the chamber beneath the pyramid, but this time, it wasn't silent. The air buzzed with energy as a group of shadowy figures moved around the central crystal. They wore strange, sleek suits that shimmered like liquid metal, and their movements were precise, almost mechanical. One of them placed a device onto the crystal's surface. The crystal dimmed, its hum faltering like a dying breath. Lena crouched behind a column, her mind racing. If the crystal failed, everything she had just seen, the twisted pyramids, the Nihil, the destruction, would come to pass. She had to act. Her hand tightened around the shard Ravi had given her. It vibrated in her palm, growing warmer, as if urging her forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the light. "Stop!" she shouted. The figures turned as one, their faces hidden behind smooth, featureless masks. One of them spoke, their voice hollow and distorted. "You do not belong here." "Neither do you," Lena shot back, raising the shard. It glowed brighter, and the air around her seemed to ripple. "Step away from the crystal." The leader tilted their head, as if considering her words. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The flow of time bends to our will now." "Not if I can help it," Lena said. She thrust the shard forward, and a blinding light erupted from it, connecting with the central crystal. The hum returned, louder and more resonant than ever, and the figures staggered as if struck by an invisible force. "You don't understand what you're meddling with," the leader hissed. "The crystal's power is not meant for mortals." Lena gritted her teeth, pushing the shard closer to the crystal. "Maybe not. But it chose me anyway." The chamber shook violently, cracks spidering across the walls. The figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into streams of light. The leader's voice echoed as they vanished. "You may have delayed us, but the cycle cannot be broken." As the last of them disappeared, the crystal emitted one final pulse, and Lena felt herself being pulled again. This time, she landed back in the desert, the pyramids towering above her in their familiar, ancient majesty. The air was still, the only sound the wind whispering through the sands. Her comm crackled. "Lena, are you there? What happened?" She looked at the shard in her hand, now dim and inert, and then at the pyramids. "I think I just saved the timeline." But as she stared at the distant horizon, a faint shimmer caught her eye, an afterimage of something unnatural, lingering just beyond her perception. The crystal's warning echoed in her mind. The cycle begins anew. Lena's fingers tightened around the inert shard, its weight feeling heavier now than it had before. The faint shimmer on the horizon grew stronger, like heat waves in the desert. She squinted, trying to make out the source, but the phenomenon eluded definition. It was neither solid nor entirely incorporeal, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. Her comm buzzed again. Rovi's voice was frantic. "Lena, are you okay?" Sensors just went wild for a second, and then everything normalized. "Where are you?" "I'm at the surface," Lena said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I stopped something. But it's not over. There's still something wrong." "What do you mean?" Rovi asked. "You're back in the present, aren't you?" Lena hesitated. She scanned the horizon again, and the shimmer seemed to pulse, faintly synchronized with her heartbeat. "I think the timeline is trying to stabilize, but it's fragile. The nihil, those figures, they're not done. They said the cycle can't be broken." Rovi sighed audibly. "Lena, if this is what I think it is, you might need to come back to base. We can analyze what's happening, gather data." "No time," she cut him off. "Whatever's out there, it's already affecting reality. If we wait, we might lose the chance to stop it." Before Rovi could argue, Lena began walking toward the shimmer. Each step felt heavier, like the desert itself resisted her movement. The shard in her hand grew warmer, as if responding to the distortion ahead. She didn't know what she would find, but an instinct, perhaps the crystal's influence, urged her forward. As she approached the shimmer, it resolved into a circular disturbance, a swirling vortex that distorted the air like a mirage. Within the vortex, Lena could make out faint shapes, structures, figures, and landscapes that flickered and shifted, each one a fragment of time colliding with another. One moment, it showed a lush jungle. The next, a futuristic cityscape. Then, a desolate wasteland. "This is where it's leaking," she muttered, realization dawning. The timelines weren't just diverging, they were colliding, bleeding into one another through this rift. A low, resonant hum emanated from the vortex, growing louder as Lena drew closer. It wasn't the harmonious vibration of the pyramid's crystal. This was chaotic, discordant, like 1,000 voices screaming out of sync. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the vortex. Lena's breath caught as she recognized them. It was the leader of the nihil, their featureless mask shimmering with the same strange light as the rift. But now, their presence felt heavier, more tangible, as though the rift amplified their power. "You cannot stop the flow," the figure said, their voice reverberating with layered tones. "Your interference only delays the inevitable." Lena raised the shard instinctively, its faint glow reigniting. "The timeline isn't yours to destroy." The figure tilted their head. "Destroy? No. We seek to perfect it. Your kind clings to chaos, to chance. We bring order. Order by erasing everything that doesn't fit your version of perfection?" Lena shot back, taking a step closer. "That's not order. That's annihilation." The figure extended a hand, and the vortex flared, its chaotic imagery stabilizing into a singular vision, a world of sterile metallic landscapes, devoid of life or individuality. This is the destiny of all timelines. The cycle must converge. Lena felt a surge of anger and defiance. "Not while I'm here." She thrust the shard forward, and it resonated with a piercing tone that seemed to cut through the vortex's cacophony. The figure staggered, their form flickering as the shard's light expanded, creating a barrier between Lena and the vortex. The figure's voice grew desperate. "You do not understand the consequences. If the cycle remains broken, the flow will spiral into entropy. Lena gritted her teeth, pushing the shard closer to the vortex. Better chaos than your lifeless order. The shard flared brighter, and the vortex began to collapse in on itself, the swirling images fading into darkness. The figure let out a distorted scream as they dissolved into the void, their presence finally extinguished. As the vortex collapsed entirely, the desert was plunged into silence. Lena dropped to her knees, exhausted, the shard in her hand now a dull, lifeless fragment of crystal. She looked around, half expecting the horizon to shimmer again, but everything seemed calm. Her comm buzzed once more. Rovi's voice broke through, filled with relief. Lena, your signal just stabilized. Are you okay? What happened? It's over, she said, though her voice wavered. At least for now. For now. Rovi pressed. Lena stared at the shard, her reflection fractured across its surface. Deep within, she thought she saw faint flickers of light, an echo of the crystal's power, waiting. The cycle's fragile. They'll try again. But now we know what we're dealing with. Rovi sighed. And what exactly is that? Lena looked toward the pyramids, their ancient forms standing resolute against the sands of time. A war for the timeline itself. And it's only just beginning. The shard pulsed faintly, and for the briefest moment, Lena felt the presence of the crystal again, watching, waiting, and ready. Lena stood motionless, the faint pulse of the shard reverberating through her palm. It felt like a heartbeat, not her own, but something older and far more deliberate. The desert air seemed unnaturally still, as though the world held its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Rovi's voice came through the comm again, insistent. Lena, you can't do this alone. Get back to the base so we can work together. You're running on fumes. I can't leave, Lena replied, her gaze fixed on the pyramids. The towering structures seemed to shimmer faintly now, as though they were alive, reacting to the temporal disturbance. The pyramids, they're connected to this. They're the anchors holding our timeline together. And they've been doing that for thousands of years, Rovi said. What's different now? Someone, maybe the Nihil, found a way to disrupt them, Lena said. The vortex wasn't just a rift. It was an infection. If I leave now, we might lose our chance to reinforce the timeline. Rovi's hesitation was palpable. Finally, he sighed. Then tell me how I can help. Lena felt a surge of relief at his words. The hieroglyphs. Remember the carvings we found last month near the Queen's chamber? They mentioned a balance, a harmonic equation embedded in the crystal's matrix. We need to decode it. Rovi groaned audibly. You're talking about the one we dismissed as ceremonial nonsense? Yes, Lena said firmly. It wasn't nonsense. Those carvings are the blueprint for stabilizing the flow. I need you to get them on the main screen and cross-reference them with the crystal's resonance data. Rovi didn't argue further. On it. But Lena, if this goes south. It won't, Lena interrupted, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Just trust me. She made her way back to the pyramid, the shard growing colder with each step. As she entered the ancient structure, the hum of the central crystal filled her ears once again. The vast chamber pulsed with energy, the walls alive with shifting hieroglyphs. Lena paused, watching as the symbols rearranged themselves, forming intricate patterns that seemed to defy logic. The crystal at the chamber's center was dimmer than before, its light flickering like a dying flame. Lena approached cautiously, her hand tightening around the shard. You're trying to tell me something, aren't you? She murmured. The symbols on the walls shifted again, and a single word formed at eye level. Unity. Unity. Lena repeated, her mind racing. Was it a warning? A solution? The word lingered for a moment before dissolving back into the swirling glyphs. Her comm crackled. Lena, Rovi's voice came through, tinged with excitement. I think I've got something. The carvings describe a ritual, an activation sequence, basically. It's meant to harmonize the crystal's resonance with the surrounding pyramids. What kind of sequence? Lena asked, already knowing the answer would involve more risk than she wanted to take. It's complicated, Ravi admitted. You have to align the crystal's frequency with the others, and then use the shard to amplify the connection. But here's the catch, it requires a direct conduit. Lena frowned. Define direct conduit. Ravi said simply. The shard will sync the crystals, but only if someone channels its energy. Think of it as completing the circuit. Lena stared at the shard, her stomach twisting. You're saying I have to let this thing use me as a conductor? Ravi hesitated. I wouldn't put it like that, but yeah, basically. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. The idea of becoming a literal bridge for temporal energy was terrifying, but the alternative was worse. If the timeline fractured again, there might not be another chance to repair it. Okay, she said finally. Tell me what to do. The process began with the shard. Lena placed it into a groove at the base of the central crystal, watching as it flared to life. The crystal responded immediately, its flickering light stabilizing into a steady glow. The hum grew louder, resonating deep in her chest. Step 2, Ravi said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Place your hands on the crystal. It's going to feel intense. Lena took a deep breath and pressed her palms against the crystal's surface. A jolt of energy shot through her, and she gasped, nearly pulling away. But as the initial shock faded, she felt something else, an overwhelming sense of connection. It was as though the crystal wasn't just a machine but a living entity, ancient and infinitely wise. The hieroglyphs on the walls erupted in a cascade of light, their patterns shifting faster than Lena could follow. The pyramid itself seemed to hum in harmony, its energy aligning with the central crystal. Final step, Ravi said. You need to focus. Visualize the flow of time stabilizing. The shard will amplify your intent. Lena closed her eyes, her mind reaching out instinctively. She pictured the timeline as a fragile thread, fraying at the edges, and imagined weaving it back together. The energy coursing through her grew stronger, almost unbearable, but she held on. The hum reached a crescendo, and for a moment, Lena felt as though she were everywhere at once, past, present, and future collapsing into a single unified moment. She saw glimpses of other realities, some peaceful, others terrifying. Through it all, the word unity echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of her purpose. With a final surge of energy, the crystal flared brighter than ever, and the chamber was flooded with light. When the light faded, Lena found herself lying on the chamber floor, the shard in her hand completely inert. The central crystal glowed faintly, its hum now a gentle, harmonious melody. Lena. Ravi's voice broke through the silence. Are you okay? She sat up slowly, her body aching but intact. I think it worked. The hieroglyphs on the walls were still now, their patterns fixed in a state of balance. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The crystal's power was restored, but the timeline remained fragile, and the Nihil were still out there, waiting for their next opportunity. As she made her way back to the surface, Lena knew one thing for certain. The pyramids were more than monuments. They were the guardians of time itself, and their secrets were far from fully uncovered. And she, chosen by the crystal, was now their unwitting protector. The desert winds whispered around her as she emerged into the sunlight, carrying a faint, familiar hum. The cycle had stabilized for now. But unity, she realized, was a fragile thing.